At 23 minutes past midnight on the 31st of August 1997, a Mercedes-Benz struck the 13th pillar of the Alma Bridge tunnel in Paris at speed. 3 people died. 1 survived. The woman in the back seat, the most photographed human being on Earth, lay broken inside the wreckage. She would die hours later in a hospital across the city. The world has spent nearly 30 years arguing about why. There is a version sold by tabloids in which the answer is simple. A drunk driver. An Egyptian playboy who had no business being near a princess. A late-night chase. A pillar. There is a version sold by a grieving father in which the answer is operatic. MI6 assassins. A royal panic about a Muslim stepfather to the future king. A secret pregnancy. A murder dressed up as an accident. Both versions are nonsense. The real story is darker than either because the real story has no villain and no plot, only a long chain of small decisions made by men who should have known better, and a mythology built afterward by a man who could not bear to face what his son's death actually meant. To understand what killed Diana, you have to understand the man sitting beside her, not the tabloid cartoon, not the bronze statue his father would later install inside Harrods. The actual man, Ahmad Eldin Mohammed Abdel Manem Fayed, known to his friends as Dodi, was born on the 15th of April 1955 in Alexandria, the cosmopolitan Mediterranean port that had been hosting wealthy Egyptian, Greek, Italian, and Levantine families for generations. The Alexandria of 1955 teetered on the edge of disappearing. Gamal Abdel Nasser had taken the presidency the year before. The Suez Crisis loomed a year ahead, and an old multicultural elite had begun its long bleed out into European exile, the children of that elite scattering across Geneva and London and Paris for the rest of the century. Dodi came first among Mohammed Fayed's children, born to Mohammed's first wife, Samira Khashoggi. That sentence sounds simple, but it is not simple at all. Tucked inside those names sits the genetic material of 3 decades of geopolitical scandal that would echo through Dodi's life and shape the family he never quite escaped. Samira's brother, Adnan Khashoggi, would become the most famous arms dealer of the 20th century. Adnan brokered weapons deals between Western governments and Middle Eastern royalty, took his cut, and spent that cut on yachts and parties that became their own kind of geopolitical signaling. Through Samira's family connections, Mohammed Fayed gained access to the kind of money and the kind of rooms that turn a clever Egyptian businessman into a player on the global stage, particularly in Dubai during the early 1960s oil boom. The marriage itself did not survive even 2 years. Mohammed and Samira divorced in 1956 when their only child barely walked. From that moment forward, Dodi existed inside a strange custody pattern. His mother lived, but stayed mostly absent. His father appeared in his son's life only between flights. The actual work of raising him fell to staff, schools, and a rotating cast of relatives across at least 3 countries. Samira died in 1986, a heart attack that took her without warning when Dodi turned 31. She had been mostly a phantom in his childhood. Her death turned the phantom permanent. This counts as the first thing the tabloids erased. Dodi Fayed had a mother, and losing her in 1986 broke something in him that never quite went back together properly. His behavior in the 11 years that followed bears the imprint of that absence. The original family surname carried no prefix in any document predating the 1970s. No nobility, no ancient lineage hidden in the consonants. Just Fayed. The whole costume came later, applied by Mohammed himself for reasons of marketing rather than ancestry, which is the part the family rarely volunteers. Mohammed added the al sometime in the 1970s. He did not inherit the prefix, nor did he discover it in a forgotten branch of his family tree. He glued it on because it sounded better to Western ears, because it suggested a patrician Arab lineage that the Fayed family did not actually possess. A UK Department of Trade and Industry investigation into his takeover of Harrods documented this in detail. The British press mocked it relentlessly for decades, and the mockery is part of why Mohammed Fayed never received the British citizenship he spent his life chasing. The al worked as a costume that Mohammed wore the way other men wear hairpieces. The wearing of it shaped every public-facing decision he made for the next 40 years, including, eventually, the way he managed his own dead son's reputation. Dodi grew up inside a family whose own surname was being rewritten in real time by a father obsessed with how he appeared to the British establishment. Identity in the Fayed household worked like a marketing decision. Heritage came as something you could purchase and renovate, the same way Mohammed would eventually purchase and renovate Harrods, the Paris Ritz, and Fulham Football Club. If your father can change your last name to chase status, what else can he change? Almost everything. The answer ran from his schooling to his professional title to the way history would eventually remember him. Dodi's childhood resembled a passport stamp collection that ran from Alexandria to Dubai to Geneva to Paris to London, none of which ever quite became home. That is what happens to children of the global wealthy. You become a citizen of hotels, a passport with too many stamps and no particular country willing to claim you as one of its own. His formal schooling came at the Institut Le Rosey in Switzerland, the kind of place where the children of shahs, dictators, oil sheikhs, and minor European royalty learn to ski and to nod politely in 4 languages. Le Rosey provides an introduction service for the international ruling class, dressed up as a boarding school. The real curriculum is the contact list you leave with. After Le Rosey, the official biography says he attended the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. This is technically true and entirely misleading in the way that almost everything about the Fayed family's public-facing record turns out to be technically true and entirely misleading. Sandhurst commissions British Army officers through a brutal 44-week training program that ends with the Sovereign's Parade. Dodi did not do this. He did not come anywhere near doing this. He attended instead a short special course Sandhurst occasionally ran for the sons of wealthy foreign dignitaries, a finishing school version of military life with the brutality filed off. His father's geopolitical connections arranged the placement. The course produced no commission, no rank, only a line on a CV. So when British tabloids in the 1990s described Dodi as Sandhurst trained, with the implication that he had survived the same crucible as British officers, they were participating in his father's preferred fiction. He had been there. He had not done that. In 1979, Mohammed Fayed found a production company called Allied Stars and installed his son in it. No film school education backed Dodi. No apprenticeship in any below-the-line craft. No track record of any kind in the film business. His father, however, kept writing very large checks. The company's first major credit came with Breaking Glass in 1980, a British rock and roll drama that did fine without being remembered. Then came Chariots of Fire. The production would define Dodi Fayed's professional reputation for the rest of his life, and afterward, more than anything else he ever attached his name to. Chariots of Fire won Best Picture at the 1982 Academy Awards. Dodi Fayed received an executive producer credit. Walk into any IMDb page or any obituary and you will see those 2 facts placed next to each other, and you will be invited to draw the obvious conclusion. He was an Oscar-winning producer, but not in any meaningful sense of those words. The actual creative engine behind Chariots of Fire was David Putnam, who had spent years developing the project and putting the elements together. When the production ran out of money mid-shoot, Mohammed Fayed wrote a rescue check of approximately £1.5 million, and in exchange the family received producer credits. David Putnam himself, after Dodi's death, took pains to publicly distance himself from the Fayed family and clarify the historical record. Dodi, in Putnam's account, had virtually no creative involvement and was frequently absent from set. He carried a name on a contract. The check had purchased the appearance of authorship, in much the same way the Al prefix had purchased the appearance of aristocracy a decade earlier. The filmography that followed kept up the pretense. F's in 1986, F's 2 in 1991. Hook the same year, where his credit came largely from early rights acquisition rather than any actual hands-on producing. The Scarlet Letter with Demi Moore in 1995, a critical disaster of historic proportions that remains, even now, a strong contender for the worst Hester Prynne ever committed to film. In each case, Dodi's name appears in the financier and packager position rather than the line-producing trenches. He brought money and introductions. In the boring daily sense, he never produced any of the films his name appeared on. People who worked with him in this period, however, mostly liked him. He came across as soft-spoken, polite, generous in person, not a screamer or a tantrum thrower in a town where screaming and tantrum throwing was the regional sport. The Hollywood crowd was full of obnoxious money guys with worse manners. Dodi made easy company, simply not a filmmaker. When his father got cold feet on a project or decided to tighten the spigot, the checks would stop. Bills would go unpaid. Hotel accounts would lapse. So here is a man in his 30s and 40s producing films he doesn't really produce, supported by an allowance that biographers placed at roughly $100,000 per month. Call it what it actually is. The allowance deserves a closer look, because it explains things that nothing else explains about Dodi Fayed's behavior in his 30s and 40s, particularly his inability to commit to any project, person, or location without his father's continued financial backing. $100,000 a month in 1990s money comes to $1.2 million a year for a single bachelor who already had his housing, his cars, his security, and most of his social life subsidized through the larger Fade business empire. By any normal measure, the number is unspendable. Most people in their 40s would simply accumulate a fortune and quietly grow rich. Doty managed to spend it all. Sometimes he burned through it faster than it arrived, requiring his father's accountants in London to wire emergency top-ups across the Atlantic on short notice. The cocaine drew no secrecy. Tom Bower's biography and the Vanity Fair investigation from 1997 both documented his cocaine use as a routine feature of his Hollywood years, not as a tabloid rumor, but as something his actual circle confirmed on the record. He never reached chaotic addict territory by all accounts. He functioned as a high-functioning user in a town and an era where high-functioning use formed the wallpaper of the industry he had bought his way into. The bounce checks drew no secrecy either. He paid late or partially, or occasionally not at all, waiting for someone in London to clean it up before any embarrassment could leak into the press. In the most precise and literal sense, he had never faced the consequences of his own spending. Every time he hit the bottom of the account, his father refilled the account. Around him, his peers in their late 30s and 40s had children, mortgages, divorces, businesses they had built or destroyed on their own credit. Doty had none of that. Instead, he kept an allowance and a permanent adolescence, lived in Malibu and Mayfair in the south of France, and got photographed at premieres for films he had paid to be associated with. Then came the summer of 1997. For a brief stretch of weeks, it looked, against all prior evidence and against all the patterns of his previous 4 decades like Doty Fayed, might be about to become an adult. In that summer, Doty had become engaged to a 29-year-old American model named Kelly Fisher. The engagement was real, not the staged tabloid romance the British press had retroactively assigned to his earlier years with figures like Brooke Shields, all of which the supposed partners had denied as purely public relations fictions invented to keep Doty's name in the gossip columns. Kelly Fisher was different. Doty had purchased a house in Malibu. Specific financial promises sat in legal filings. He had told her he wanted her to scale back her modeling career so they could build a life together. According to the lawsuit she eventually filed in Los Angeles County Superior Court, he had offered her $500,000 to do exactly that. The dollar figure appears in the original complaint filed by Fisher's attorney, Gloria Allred, in the Los Angeles County Superior Court in August 1997. In July of 1997, Mohammed Fayed invited Princess Diana and her 2 sons to holiday at his villa in Saint-Tropez. He summoned Doty to join them. Doty flew in from where he had been spending time with Kelly Fisher on a yacht moored nearby in the south of France. Fisher remained on the yacht while Doty headed up to his father's villa, One Harbor, over to entertain a princess. For most of August, Fisher did not know what was happening. She thought she was waiting for her fiancé. In actual fact, she was waiting for a man who, in real time, had transferred his attention to the most photographed woman on Earth and was not coming back to her boat. When the story broke and Doty did not return, Fisher hired the attorney Gloria Allred and filed a breach of contract suit. The suit landed in mid-August 1997. Roughly 2 weeks later, Doty Fayed lay dead in a Paris tunnel, and Fisher dropped the lawsuit out of respect for his family. A grown man engaged to one woman abandoned her on a yacht in the south of France while he sailed off with another. A real person on a real yacht in a real harbor ended up hurt by his choices. Her hurt is part of his historical record. It also tells you something about the speed at which the Diana relationship unfolded. The relationship between Doty Fayed and Diana, Princess of Wales, lasted less than 2 months. People who have absorbed the conspiracy literature talk about Doty and Diana the way they talk about Charles and Camilla as if it had been a long-running affair of state. It amounted to a holiday romance, a spectacular, paparazzi-saturated, internationally watched holiday romance. Sure, but a holiday romance. It began at Mohammed Fayed's villa in Saint-Tropez in July 1997, and it played out almost entirely at sea on the Fayed family yacht called the Jonikal, which would become the principal setting for what remained of their lives. Diana and Doty cruised the Mediterranean through August. Photographers shot them constantly. Those pictures sold for prices that would, in retrospect, become part of the murder weapon that killed them both. What actually happened between them is harder to know. The people who knew Diana best disagree with the people who knew Mohammed best in ways that are not coincidental and that map almost perfectly onto each side's incentives after the crash. Diana's closest confidantes including her friend Rosa Monckton and Lady Annabel Goldsmith, provided detailed testimony to the Operation Paget investigation in the years that followed. Their account stays consistent. Diana enjoyed herself. She found Dodi affectionate and kind, a generous man who treated her with care during a period of her life when most of the attention coming her way did the opposite. She harbored no intention of marrying him. No pregnancy existed. Conversion to anything had never appeared on her schedule. By all credible accounts, she remained a recently divorced 36-year-old woman, taking a sun-soaked summer with a wealthy man who treated her well and kept her laughing. Muhammad Fayed, after his son's death, would build an entire mythology on the opposite premise, that his son and Diana were secretly engaged, that she carried his grandchild, that the British state had murdered them both to prevent a Muslim stepfather for the future king. He repeated the accusation in interview after interview for the rest of his life. The forensic evidence in Operation Paget would eventually demolish all of this. Diana was definitively not pregnant. The blood from the Mercedes footwell and an examination of her remains confirmed her condition with the kind of clinical certainty that conspiracy theories cannot survive. The plot did not exist. No MI6 hit team operated. No royal command came down. No Muslim stepfather panic gripped the British establishment. A man fell in love with a princess over 6 weeks. Then a tunnel arrived. One other detail belongs in this story because it became the centerpiece of the mythology that swallowed Diana's death whole. On the afternoon of the 30th of August 1997, the last day either Diana or Dodi would live to see the sunrise, Dodi Fayed walked into the Alberto Rapazzi jewelry store in Paris and purchased a ring from a collection called Dis Moi Oui. The name translates, with no subtlety whatsoever, as tell me yes. Surveillance footage from the store recorded the visit. The receipt sits in the public record. What the ring meant has been argued about ever since. Operation Paget interviewed everyone who knew Diana well enough to know what actually occupied her mind during those weeks. The conclusion came out straightforward and unanimous. Diana viewed the ring, if she viewed it at all before the crash, as a friendship gift or at most a pre-engagement token of affection from a wealthy man who liked dramatic gestures. On the night of the crash, she was not about to accept a marriage proposal. The people closest to her have maintained this repeatedly and consistently for more than 2 decades. A man can buy a ring with one set of intentions while the woman receiving it carries a different set. Dodi may genuinely have hoped Diana would say yes. That does not retroactively turn her engagement to him into a fact, and it certainly does not turn his death into a murder. But the ring, in the hands of a grieving father with infinite money and infinite media access, became the centerpiece of a conspiracy industry that ran for almost 20 years. Muhammad put the ring on display. He sent it out for photographs. He mentioned it in every interview and press release. The object became the most exhausting prop in modern royal mythology. For the rest of the world, the ring stayed just a ring. On the evening of the 30th of August 1997, Dodi and Diana dined at the Hotel Ritz in Paris, the hotel his father owned. The paparazzi stood at the front entrance in numbers that made any normal departure impossible. So someone improvised. Hasty decisions sent them through the rear of the hotel with a decoy vehicle strategy that nobody had rehearsed and nobody had properly staffed. At approximately 20 minutes past midnight on the 31st, a Mercedes-Benz S280 pulled out from the back of the Ritz. Behind the wheel sat Henri Paul, the acting head of security at the hotel. Trevor Rhys-Jones, a former British paratrooper employed by the Fade organization, rode shotgun. Dodi and Diana sat in the back. Nobody had buckled a seatbelt. Investigators would note this detail repeatedly in the years that followed, and the coroner's jury would eventually count it as contributing to 2 of the 4 deaths. At 23 minutes past midnight, the Mercedes entered the Alma Bridge tunnel at high speed and struck the 13th pillar. The impact destroyed the car. Emergency responders would later describe the wreckage as one of the worst single-car collisions they had ever attended in the center of Paris, a city not short on bad accidents. Henri Paul died at the scene. Dodi Fayed died at the scene. Diana, Princess of Wales, emerged from the wreckage alive and rode by ambulance to the Béthier-Salpêtrière Hospital, where she died hours later from internal injuries that, with a seatbelt, she might have survived. Trevor Rhys-Jones, the only seat-belted occupant in the car, survived with severe injuries to his face and skull. The French judicial investigation, the Operation Paget review, and the 2008 British coroner's inquest established the technical cause of the crash with a level of detail rare in any traffic fatality. Henri Paul's blood alcohol registered more than 3 times the French legal limit. His system also contained therapeutic doses of fluoxetine, marketed in the United States as Prozac, and thiopuride, a medication used in alcohol withdrawal treatment. Both of these drugs interact dangerously with alcohol. By every clinical measure available, he was not fit to drive a vehicle that night, let alone a luxury sedan at high speed evading a paparazzi pursuit. He should never have sat in that driver's seat. People who put him there bear part of the weight of what followed. The paparazzi pursued the car at speeds French and British investigators considered reckless and contributory. They were chasing money. A clear shot of the Princess of Wales that night ran into 6 figures per image, depending on the buyer and the angle. The men chasing her had been hunting her professionally for 16 years, and the price of a single decent photograph had now exceeded the annual salary of most of the people who would later buy the magazines those photographs filled. The 2008 British Coroner's Inquest jury delivered its verdict on the 7th of April. Unlawful killing, grossly negligent driving of the following paparazzi vehicles, and grossly negligent driving of the Mercedes by Henri Paul. The jury identified the failure of the victims to wear seatbelts as a contributing factor in the deaths of Dodi Fayed and Diana, Princess of Wales. That is the verdict. That is the documented historical record. No version of events contradicts this verdict without contradicting forensic, toxicology, surveillance footage, witness testimony, and the basic laws of physics that govern what happens when a luxury sedan strikes a concrete pillar at high speed. Dodi Fayed received an initial burial at Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey in an Islamic funeral attended by close family. Then he was moved. In October 1997, his remains were reinterred on the grounds of the Fayed family estate at Barrow Green Court in Oxted, where his father could visit him daily and where his father would, over the next quarter century, talk to him. In 2005, Mohammed Fayed unveiled a bronze statue inside Harrods called Innocent Victims. The piece depicted his son and Diana dancing beneath the wings of an albatross. In case the symbolism risked being too restrained, the albatross referred to the seabird associated with grief and the souls of the dead. The statue stood near the Egyptian escalator alongside a smaller memorial Muhammad had installed in 1998 that held photographs of the couple, a wine glass from their last dinner, and a ring he claimed was the Rapazzi engagement ring used the night before the Paris crash. It was not the Rapazzi ring. The actual Rapazzi ring had been recovered separately and entered into the inquest's evidentiary record years earlier. The memorials were not subtle, nor were they designed to be. They amounted to a department store cathedral honoring the Fayed family's preferred version of events, and tourists filed past them every day for years, treating them as if they constituted public history. In 2010, Mohammed sold Harrods to Qatar Holdings. The new owners tolerated the memorials for almost a decade out of respect for the family. In 2018, they finally removed them and returned them to Mohammed personally. The innocent victim statue ended up at Fulham Football Club, the other major Fayed possession at that time, before eventually being sent into private storage and out of public view entirely. This had been the last public-facing infrastructure of the Fayed conspiracy theory, and its removal in 2018 ended the era quietly. By 2023, when Mohammed Fayed himself died, almost no serious commentator outside the conspiracy fringe still entertained the murder narrative. The narrative had been killed 3 times over, once by the Operation Paget report, again by the coroner's inquest, and finally by time and the steady accumulation of evidence that pointed always in the same direction. The conspiracy industry built around Dodi Fayed's death did not honor his memory. It buried him under his own father's obsessions. But Diana was buried under it too. For almost 20 years, you could not say her name in public without triggering an argument about MI6 and Prince Philip and pregnancy and engagement and royal cover-ups. The actual woman, the actual life, the actual person who had spent the final summer of her 36 years trying to be happy with a man who treated her kindly, vanished into the same fog that swallowed Dodi. The real story is not a murder. The real story is sadder than that. A drunk man behind the wheel of a car that should never have left the hotel. A photographer pursuit that had been getting worse for years and had now turned into a manhunt with a 6-figure prize on the windscreen. 4 people in a car, 3 seatbelts unbuckled, 1 concrete pillar, and afterwards a grieving father who could not accept the smallness of it all and who spent the rest of his life building a mythology grand enough to match the size of his grief. The mythology buried Diana a second time. It turned the most photographed woman on earth into a footnote in someone else's conspiracy. It buried the actual woman, the recently divorced mother of 2 trying to find a quiet summer at sea. beneath 20 years of legal filings and bronze statues and press releases. The men who chased her into the tunnel got paid. The driver who killed her never sobered up enough to know what he had done. And the father of the man beside her spent the next 26 years insisting it had all been part of a plan, when the truth was so much darker than that. It had been an accident. And accidents are what happen when the world stops watching the small things.